Hi, I'm Brad Bergefurd, Horticulture Specialist at the OSU South Centers, and this week's Specialty Crop Corner, we're going to be talking about specialty crop micro irrigation. We also call it drip irrigation. Last week, I introduced the use of plasticulture on specialty crops such as strawberries, hemp, a lot of our vegetable crops, melon crops, all require plasticulture to enhance yields, increase weed control, and decrease disease pressures in our plantings. This week, I'm going to talk about micro and drip irrigation that works great in conjunction with plasticulture. You can do either alone, but when you combine the two, that gives you the best benefits and maximizes your production. So like I ended last week, this is what we'd like to see is a well-formed bed about 4 weeks before planting. I did share with you some of the equipment, like this piece of equipment that we use to lay the plastic as well as lay the drip irrigation tape. So as you can see, the top reel on the top of this machine, that is what applies the drip irrigation tape. And we call it a tape because it looks just like plastic tape. It's very thin. And so it's all one pass operation. We raise the beds, we lay the drip tape in that bed, and then we lay the plastic mulch behind it. So I ended last week's talk with this introductory slide. Does irrigation pay? And this is a sweet corn field. And see how it's a little shorter on that one row? Guess what's missing? That row, the irrigation plugged up on it. So all the other rows next to it had good irrigation throughout the season, except for that part of the row where that irrigation plugged up. And so that's visual evidence that drip irrigation and irrigation does pay on our specialty crops. So I guess to kick it off, the water tip of the day, 1 acre inch is equal to 27,154 gallons of water. So if Mother Nature does not give us, we usually work with Mother Nature on 1 inch of water per week. We want to provide our specialty crops that, whether she provides it with rainfall or if she doesn't, which many times she does not give us that 1 inch of water per week, we as specialty crop farmers need to apply that 1 acre inch of water per week. So when you're planning your irrigation strategies, that's the number to keep in mind, 27,154 gallons per acre by either us or Mother Nature every week of the growing season for our specialty crop. So we're just going to go real quick through this over the next 20 minutes, just a typical drip system layout. We've had all day workshops and schools on laying out, designing, and managing a drip irrigation system. So you're only going to get so much today, but for future programs, and if we have full day workshops, you can come and learn more about it. So really, when it comes to drip irrigation, why do we use drip over overhead? Well, it comes back to this gallon amount. That's 27,154 gallons per acre. So if we were to cover a whole acre field with 1 inch of water, that's the number we need. Now, when you look at our rows, like these rows, you see we don't have the entire field covered, do we? Really, only about 50–60% of that field is covered. Now, if we were overheaded irrigation, we'd have to irrigate in between those rows and everything. With drip, we can cut our irrigation amounts almost in half because we're only irrigating the beds that the plants are on. So this is what we would need then if we're going to adopt drip irrigation on our specialty crop farm. You got to have a system, a water source. It can either be an open body of water, such as a lake, a reservoir, a pond. You can irrigate from rivers and streams. It could be wells. It could even be city or county water. But you do need to have an irrigation source. So if you're a specialty crop farmer or thinking about being one, and you have no source of irrigation on the farm, then you may want to consider growing some other type of a crop other than specialty crops, because you will need water at some point throughout that growing season. Most all of our water sources will need to be filtered. So those are the next, the blue things that you say. We'll talk about chemical injection in a little bit. Those are the 3 white tanks, but we're going to go right to the blue tanks, and that's where we have to filter our water. And we'll talk about several ways here real quick, how to filter your water. I'll talk about that here shortly. And then we take it after the filter and we run it to our fields. And you can see then at the end of that line where the blue filters are, we run that water either underground or above ground through some mainline pipes. And then off of those mainline pipes is where we connect the irrigation tape that's laid down each row, and we individually connect that. So that is a typical drip system layout. Now we'll go real quick more in depth on each of those pieces over the next few minutes here. But this is what your drip irrigation tape looks like. Just like I was saying, it is basically made out of plastic, and it is a tape. Comes on these big spools, depending on the thickness of the spool, the thickness of the tape. You get anywhere from, or I think most of them are anywhere from 6,000 to 12,000 linear feet on a roll of tape. And it all varies by manufacturer and by thickness. You'd use a lighter weight tape if it's just a 1 year use. Use a thicker tape if you're going to go on a more of a perennial planting. And then we actually even have irrigation tubing. So it's a little bit thicker than that, and that would be for perennial plantings like raspberries, blackberries, hops, crops that are going to be have that irrigation applied to them over many, many years. So what makes it drip? This is a side cut of a drip irrigation tape. And it's just those little orifices or those little emitters. You see the little tiny hole there, but it's what's inside the tape is what matters. So the water is running through that tape under very low pressure, 10 to 12 pounds of pressure, nothing real high. And then it just really literally drips and drips and drips very slowly. You can have a high output drip tape. You can have low flow drip tape. A lot of those decisions are based on the crop, the soil type, and your water source. But that's just what the inside of a drip irrigation line looks like. So when we talk about filtration, you see how important it is. Those little tiny blue passageways within that tape, those can plug very easily, not to mention the little blue round discharge hole that's in the tape. So that's why filtration is very important on no matter what water source that we're using. The whole basis of drip is it runs off a capillary movement of that moisture in the soil. Depending on your soil type, water moves sideways and up in the soil. The finer the soil, the more the movement. If beds are kept moist, water moves better than if beds or soil is dry. Therefore, with drip irrigation, we irrigate often. We don't want that field to dry out and then try to rehydrate those beds, because that capillary movement will be all out of adjustment and will not work. You'll have to end up applying more water in order to get that soil back into the moisture it needs for that capillary movement to occur. But like I said, raised beds covered with plastic mulch benefit very little from the rain. In my last talk last week, we talked how that plastic can actually shed the moisture, or under heavy rains, like I mentioned, goose drowning rains, where you get so much rain that it can drown a goose. So the raised beds covered with that plastic actually shed those heavy rainfall events. And a small rainfall event, half inch or less, really is not going to benefit too much underneath that plastic because of the lack of that capillary movement of the water. So that's why the two, plastic culture and drip, work good in conjunction with each other. But this just gives you the 3 different soil types: clay, loam, and sand. And it's pretty common sense. When you have a soil that's heavy in clay, the moisture won't go down as far, but it'll spread out. That capillary movement will spread out. Loamy soil works the best. You get the depth of penetration as well as you get the lateral movement of the moisture. And then anybody knows sand? You pour a glass of water in sand, it goes right straight down. That's what we have with a sand particle, is the moisture has a tendency to go down. So our run time is actually going to be what? Longer on sand and less on clay to do a good irrigation of that plant's root zone. So some of the basic components, we're going to go through these pretty fast. We can use tanks for small urban farms or small acreage farms. You could use all kinds of tanks and collect the water from your barns and your neighbor's barns and your house and your neighbor's house. And if you have no water source at all, you can hold the water, but 27,154 gallons of water per acre inch. And we're going to need, and that's per week, and we're going to need that for about 20 weeks, depending on the crop. That's a lot of water, and you're going to need a lot of tanks to hold that. So as you can see, as we get up to any sizable acreage, tanks probably just aren't going to work for us. But for small urban farms, small commercial plantings, you can definitely collect enough rainwater to irrigate quite a big patch of produce. Ponds, creeks, and rivers, those are awesome sources of water, but remember what they look like in the summertime. They get all slimy and green, and they need to be maintained. So if you're going to use an open body of water, you'll have to maintain that as well, and that could actually start plugging up things. But we're going to need pumps to move that water somehow, no matter which source we're using. Got to use a suction hose that's going to be floating on that body of water. Going to need discharge hose, going to need fittings. Filtering in an open body of water is definitely a must. That's where we use some pretty large capacity filters. And just remember, if your pond or your open source of water is supplied by runoff from other fields, what if you go 2 or 3 months with no rainfall? That pond can go down pretty fast on you. So just keep all those things in mind. Wells are good. You just have to be able to have a well that has some very good water source in it. And again, remember the capacity that you have. If you use public water, it can get a little pricey. At 27,154 gallons an acre, you'll have to run the economics on using the public water system. But again, it just depends on the size of the farm field. A simple garden hose can be a supply line. You can just, if you have a small planting, you could just screw that onto your hydrant at the house or the barn and turn it on, and you can supply the water to your field. Very high friction though because of the small diameter, and you get a lot of pressure loss. So it's not really an efficient method of supplying the water to the fields. If they get any sizable size to them, you have to use a larger diameter hose. This is what we use at the research farm at Piketon. We use a plastic blue stripe oval hose that it lays flat and you can drive over it. Even under pressure. So those are good if you have a lot of traffic in the field or in the area like we have at the research farm. And those sizes come from anywhere from a 1/2 inch to 4 inch diameter. And it just depends on the size of your field and what the volume output you're needing from from that discharge hose and that supply line. For many years, I used the blue vinyl lay flat hose, which lays even flatter than the blue stripe. But it can cut a lot easier. So if you drive over this and there's a little rock underneath it, you can actually cut that hose. It does store a lot better. You can roll this up at the end of the season and it rolls a lot tighter than the blue oval hose. But each has its own pros and cons. Again, they're available in 1.5 to 16 inch diameters, and you can get them up to 300-foot lengths in the vinyl hose. You need some type of regulator, like I mentioned earlier. We have to keep that pressure down to 10 to 12, 14, 16, 18 pounds, depending on the tape you're using. Each manufacturer will give the pressure range that that tape can put up with. So again, on the left, a simple inline pressure regulator. We have those in our landscape at the South Centers, actually at Piketon. That's how we drip irrigate all of our landscape there at South Centers. You can also get the same inline regulator for a small diameter hose, and then you can even get inline regulators for a larger diameter hose like you see on the right. This is what we don't want to occur is the emitter plugging. If we get anything in there, a little grain of sand, algae, any contaminant in our drip irrigation line, that contaminant can actually plug up that emitter because you get the bridging. So then there's no water coming through that, and then it looks like that sweet corn field we started the presentation with. A good way to prevent plugging is having a flush your lines on a regular basis. We can just you can do this manually. You can have automatic flushing. When you crank up the system at low pressures, it'll actually automatically flush out for you, and then as the pressure builds up, they'll shut down. But that's the best way, is to flush out those lines on a regular basis to prevent that sediment from building up in there. There's all different kinds of filters. I would suggest definitely a filter using some type of a screen cartridge like we see here. These screen cartridges can be easily cleaned out. They come in different size meshes, so that depends on the source of water you're using. So it's a very easy type of filter to use, and you just have to get in the mode of cleaning it on a regular basis and maintenance. These are called disc filters here, which each of those little blue, yellow, and red things are many little tiny discs all stacked on top of each other. So the water goes through those discs, and that's where the contaminants are collected in between each of those discs. Again, very easy to clean. Unscrew them, take all those discs out, spray them down with a hose, clean them out, and then put them back together. But again, you have to remember to do that as part of the maintenance. None of this drip irrigation is maintenance free or management free. When you adopt this technology, you're going to be increasing your management of the system. These are sand filters, just like you have on a swimming pool, same type of thing. The more contaminated the water could be, the more sand filters you use. So this is one of my farmers that has one he puts around on the tractor and takes to the fields. He runs it through 2 sand filters because he's using an open body of water, and that'll help clean that water. If you got real clean water, then a single sand filter will work good for that. But you can see after it runs through the sand filter, this is the discharge hose where it comes back out of the filters and heads to the field. Pressure is important. If we have too high a pressure, we can blow those lines, and that's not a good thing. So we got to have pressure gauges throughout the system to make sure we're staying within the manufacturer's recommendation of pressure that drip irrigation tape can work under. And all different kinds of pressure gauges that we need to monitor coming out of the pump and going all the way into the field and into the rows. We can get so fancy, we won't talk about this today, but you can actually not even be there. These are all just run on batteries, and some are solar powered. Solenoids can actually kick this system on automatically. At Piketon, that's how ours is. Ours automatically kicks on at certain times of the day and certain days of the week because we're not there on weekends. So the irrigation system actually kicks itself on and kicks itself off with nobody there on Sundays. So that's another whole class in itself. We won't cover much today, but just to let you know that you could do that. Going to use lots of valves. You got to be able to shut this water down if you have a blowout. Valves at the main line, valves at the pumps, valves at the filters, and even valves at each individual line. Because if there is a reason to have to repair it, you got to be able to hurry up and shut those lines down. So we use plastic gate valves, or we can use brass gate valves to shut off the flow of water at any point within the irrigation system. So I think we're just about 20 minutes into it. Patrick, is there any questions on your end? Are you ready to adopt drip irrigation in your garden?
Well, after looking at that, if I had 10 acres of different specialty crop, that's 271,000 gallons. Now, I'm not going to have 10 acres.
Per week. Yes, that's a lot of water.
And that, so what crops don't need as much water?
University research has shown out of specialty crops, pumpkins don't need near as much water. And that work's been done here in Ohio by me. It's been done in Texas. It's been done out in California. Pumpkins have a deeper root system, but if you, again, run into a real dry spell during the fruit enlargement stage of pumpkins, then a 20-pound pumpkin can actually, the size can be reduced to 15. So other than that, just about every specialty crop will benefit at some stage of its life, of its growing season, with irrigation and drip irrigation.
So if I did not have drip irrigation, would I still be required to use the same amount of water?
You'll use the 27,154 if you're covering the entire acre. And like I said at the beginning, if our rows are on 5-foot or 60-inch centers, only half of the field is covered. So with drip irrigation, we're putting the water just at the base of the plant, at the root zone where the plant needs it. We're conserving half the amount of water. So if we use drip, we're only taking the 27,150 divided by 2 or thereabouts, depending on your row spacing. So yes, we're conserving half the amount of water by using drip.
I see. You know, it is rather interesting when people get into farming. Do they realize the requirement of so much water?
I don't think so. In Ohio, we've traditionally been a dry land agriculture state, which means we get sufficient rainfall most years. So farmers and growers don't really comprehend how much water an acre will give you, an acre inch gives you. So until we're in a drought situation, then the light bulb goes off that how much water those plants really consume. But they will consume an acre inch of water per week on an open field.
So has it been your experience that with the rainfalls in southern Ohio that of the 28 or 29 weeks of harvesting growing products, about how many weeks is there sufficient rain, would you say, on an average basis?
I'll give you the range. The range can go for sufficient rainfall from none to 29. But even last year, if you remember, 2019 was one of the wettest seasons we had on record. There were still many, many times that we had to drip irrigate because we went a period of time with no rainfall when those plants needed water the most, which is usually at fruit enlargement stage or pollination. So just about every year you use irrigation at some point in the season.
Wow. You know, so if you have larger acreage, is that why it's better to grow corn or wheat or soybeans?
It's not as expensive and not as management intensive. Yep, correct. But even on corn and soybeans, if you come down the Piketon, you drive along the Scioto River Valley off of 23, a lot of our grain farmers are now adopting overhead irrigation on their farms because irrigation does pay for them that they've invested in irrigation. So irrigation is a good investment for most commercial growers.
That's rather interesting. You know, I always heard that farmers had to look at the sky every day and make sure that the weather permits a healthy crop of crops. And
we do more than just look at it. We pray to the sky that Mother Nature treats us farmers right and gives us the rainfall, or don't give us the rainfall when we need it the most.
Yeah, I would imagine. So I never realized how much water an acre requires per week. That's a lot of water.
Yep, plants consume a lot, just like we do, Patrick. We consume a lot of water. Plants consume a lot of water.
And so, if I were decided to grow a little plot of, let's say, kohlrabies, I think I pronounced that right.
You got it.
And let's just say it's a 10 by 10. I would want to make sure that every week it had an inch of rain.
Yeah, and kohlrabi is actually a quick crop. So by the time you're from transplanting to harvest, you're only looking at 6 weeks. So you'll only need enough irrigation, and then you'll have to break down your row, Patrick, how much of an acre you got, and that's how you determine how much water that kohlrabi crop's got.
I see. Well, I really learn a lot, watching your programs,
Good.
because, I got my spade and my gloves, and I'm ready to go out and start digging in the ground. And, I'll plant some seeds today, and then maybe by 3 or 4 days, I'll have these juicy plants.
That don't go that fast. Sorry, Patrick. It takes quite a few weeks, but be patient. It'll happen.
I understand. There's nothing greater than fresh fruit.
Exactly, and vegetables. Yep.
Yes. Brad, I really want to thank you very much for the time and energy. Can I ask how many acres of farmland you
I grow vegetables myself, and our family has cut back. We used to be at 40 acres when all the boys were home, and now we just farm 25 of produce, and it's all under drip irrigation. So.
Oh, wow. And I'm assuming that the supply of water was planned.
I have a 1 million gallon reservoir on my farm.
Oh, wow.
I have enough water to do all 40 acres if it doesn't rain all summer.
Wow. Well, Brad, thank you very much for all of the information. And I look forward to more information from you.
Yep. We'll see y'all next week.